Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. FUBAR, new Netflix series starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Y'all want to know if it's good? Well, it's not, but you're going to want to know more than that. I'm just going to look at the first episode because that's all I've watched so far. Most of the people who watch this channel, I know you want the deeper story. Why does it suck? And like with most things, the problem is in the writing. So what would I describe FUBAR as is probably a spiritual sequel series. Like, it really feels like a sequel series to True Lies, which is interesting because there is a reboot series apparently out right now of True Lies that's not doing so well with the reviews. I haven't watched it yet, but maybe I will, and just gain a little bit more perspective on why this format seems to be popping up and part of the corporate IP death cycle in a couple of weird permutations. Also interesting is that True Lies, the James Cameron movie from 1994, I think, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, is itself a remake of a French movie. Interesting, right? So we're several layers deep in the remake, reboot, corporate IP death cycle thing with this series, FUBAR. Now, I mention it as a spiritual sequel because it has the same basic setup as True Lies. The main character is a spy, and his family does not know that he's a spy, but rather than his wife being a neglected housewife who thinks her husband's actually a boring computer salesman, it's his daughter that doesn't know that he's a spy. And the extra thing that they add to it is that he also doesn't know that she's a spy. And the surprising moment is when they both get stuck together doing their spy thing. The first episode is formatted pretty much the same as True Lies. So if you watch the movie True Lies, there's a first act that acts as an introductory or expositional act showing you some of the main characters, including the protagonist. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is seen kind of breaking into a party and going on and doing some espionage stuff and then like blasting his way out of the whole affair. Well, they copy that. So we have an introductory act that shows, again, Arnold Schwarzenegger breaking into a place. But one of the things that you will notice if you watch this is right away is that there's a bunch of unnecessary steps to the little spy caper that they're showing for the first act of this premiere to the series. So in the original True Lies, he's like swimming underwater. He like uses some underwater tools and like cuts some bars and sneaks in and then takes it off and has like a tuxedo. And there's a lot of humor to it. In this one, you see him go, you see him put on a fireman's outfit, jump onto a fire truck, jump off, go into the sewer for some reason, go through the sewer, break into a bank vault, blow up a bunch of stuff just to steal diamonds, right? So there's all these other steps that go to like him stealing this bag of diamonds. He wouldn't need to do most of those things. He could have just gone to the manhole cover and gone into it. Are people going to think a fireman going into a manhole cover all by himself is a little odd? Well, they might, So there's a lot of different things that are added in this sort of manneristic copy of True Lies. And the entire thing feels like a manneristic copy of True Lies. You have some of the same scenes from the house, except instead of Dana being a little girl, Dana is an adult getting ready to be married to a rather boring man. And he gives her like a mixer, like a KitchenAid mixer, and she's like, thanks, but later she thinks it's dumb. He's about to retire, so you have this like a cop about to retire thing, and they send him off to do one last mission in I don't remember where, Colombia or somewhere, for this drug lord, and he runs into his daughter who's also doing some sort of espionage thing with this drug lord. An interesting thing also about this is that they have them working for the CIA. And in True Lies, it's the Omega Sector. It's a fictional organization because True Lies is a comedy. In fact, I think, just as an aside, if you go and watch True Lies, James Cameron's True Lies, what you have in it is the format for almost every action movie that's happened after Cultural Ground Zero. So everything pretty much after 2000. It's not straight action. It's not very serious. It's full of comic relief. if they're really comedy action movies, not so much just action movies. Whereas if you look at things from the 80s, they're often much more straightforward. If you look at something like First Blood 2 or even Predator, there are some comic relief moments, but they are not comedies. They are action movies. Commando tends to be a comedic movie too. That's probably from an earlier time period, but all the dynamics are present with True Lies to make a template. And so they're really copying that template. We have this introductory act that shows what the character's doing. Then we show him pretending to not be a spy. Then we show him doing spy stuff and getting into trouble with his family, who discovers that he's a spy. That's the basic setup. In addition to that, you have a small cast of support characters. And the banter between these support characters is simply awful in FUBAR. It's not funny in any way. It feels like Hollywood writing, because I think they have a really hard time understanding what is and isn't funny. I think there's some sort of mental deficiency that happens when you get employed in Hollywood, where you lose touch with what absurdity actually is. Maybe because Hollywood is such an absurd place, you don't know what absurdity even is anymore. And that's what it feels like. Then there's a character who is obviously a lesbian and makes jokes about being a lesbian. There's constant wisecracks from the support team that they're in a plane or a van. This is an exact copy of the True Lies Two Guys in the Van, which is Tom Arnold, and I forget the other actor's name who played the other character. But the two guys having the banter in the van. The difference between, of course, True Lies and this is that True Lies, first of all, they cast the right people, including Tom Arnold, who is a real master of comedic timing. And they gave him the correct lines. They actually had writers who knew how to write things that were funny and were part of the moment and express those characters well. You never get the feeling with Tom Arnold's character that even though he's sort of the goofball, he's the comic relief sidekick, he's also very competent at what he does at the same time. He's a really good support character. He's a very good second banana in the True Lies movie. And in this case, the second banana, it's not that he's terrible. It's just he's not given good lines. And his personality is very flat compared to Arnold. There's nothing to play off of there. He just doesn't have the comedic timing of someone like Tom Arnold. They really just needed a little bit different casting direction there for that character whose name of the character I'm forgetting right now. Uncle something or other is what his daughter knows him as. But yeah, they don't really have any kind of impact on the story. They mostly sit in whatever the support area is, which was the van. Now, the van had a purpose in the first act of True Lies, which is he was transmitting documents to them. So they were receiving it on a computer. They were actually doing part of the espionage function. They weren't just looking through binoculars and watching and describing what was happening. They were participating in the affair. So overall, I think FUBAR was a big miss. Once you get Arnold Schwarzenegger and this actress together, who's playing his daughter. Again, I'm forgetting the name, so just forgive me if I don't have all the names worked out. I'm terrible at remembering names, either of characters or actors or actresses. They have no chemistry together. Again, most of their dialogue feels really hammy, and a lot of it is they rely very heavily on what I would call expositional dialogue. And expositional dialogue is something that you often have to use in a film format, whether it's a TV series or a movie. And that's because you don't have paragraphs of prose to work with where you can just tell the reader information that he or she needs to know. Rather, you have to tell the audience what they need to know, usually through dialogue. There's exceptions to this, right? You can have a voiceover at the beginning giving you the setup, like with Lord of the Rings, or you can have the Star Wars crawl that gives you the initial story setup and does some direct exposition. But expositional dialogue is really ends up being where characters are telling each other things for the benefit of the audience, not for each other. And that's when you feel like they're saying things to each other that are a little bit awkward or cringy. That's almost always what's happening. It's one of the things I criticized in episode 1 is that because there's so many different layers to the plot of the Phantom Menace, the characters really have to tell you kind of things that they already know to each other in order to get the audience to understand the context of everything that's going on. So they do a lot of this. It's like, hey, do you remember this time that this happened? It's like, of course I would because we were there. They tell each other things like that all the time. What they did in the True Lies movie, by contrast, is they would put those expositional things in a context where it would be actually understandable. So one of the things they did is they had a briefing of the boss, played by Chuck Heston. So Charlton Heston, with his eye patch, is like, "What do you have for me?" And then they tell him the setup and the characters and the antagonist. They basically brief the audience, but they're briefing the boss. So the boss exists as sort of a surrogate for the audience, so that expositional dialogue doesn't feel cringy, awkward, and unnecessary. In this one, they don't have that. Rather, you have characters telling each other things they already would know and probably wouldn't say to each other, and it just feels not right most of the time. You also have this sense that like there's a lot of action going on that feels very unrealistic, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It would be more acceptable if they were pulling the humor off. There's some really crazy and hilarious action in the True Lies movie, but one of the ways that we accept the absurdity of it is because we've already experienced comedy prior to that. We're kind of prepped for the absurdity of what the characters are doing. And in this case, we're not really prepped for that because we haven't felt any of the comedy. None of the comedies landed prior to that. So there's a part where like Arnold Schwarzenegger jumps off of a car onto another car and then crashes it. And he rolls off and he's fine, right? As like a 65-year-old man. It looks silly. Arnold is over 70 at this point. He's no youngin', and it's not that he can't command a presence on the camera, but it feels a little weird to have those little stunts in the middle of things. His character, again, is supposed to be 65. So those absurd kind of physical violent moments don't make a ton of sense given his age, but also given the fact that we haven't heard any kind of comedy that's landed prior to that. We're not prepped for any kind of absurd physical action because we haven't had any absurd dialogue to go with it. So anyway, I don't think it's very good, but that's the big failure. The big failure is that it's trying to copy True Lies. It's trying to be a sequel to True Lies. It's imitating all the mannerisms of True Lies without understanding what True Lies did to make it good to begin with. And including they even have the same actor from True Lies, the same setup of True Lies. People that, somebody who doesn't know, his family doesn't know he's a spy. We just add one little twist, which is that his daughter's also a spy and he doesn't know. And so there's supposed to be some drama that kind of emerges from that, but most of it falls flat. Yeah, the main problem is the writing. The production is actually decent, other than I guess maybe the band. There's a part where like a band is playing and it doesn't sound very good, but I don't know if that's intentional or not, but that would be the only thing of the production to be like, this is not the best. Otherwise, the production is fine. The production quality, the cinematography generally looks good. Scenes are usually framed and lit well. It's the acting is okay, and some actors I think are really doing their best, but the dialogue just isn't there for them to pull it off for the most part. So anyway, if you watched that first episode, you let me know what you think down below in the comment section. I would give it I don't know. We'll do, what do we want to do? Out of 10 or stars? Out of 10, I would give it like a D. 6 out of 10. That's a D for me. So I give it a D. Like, it is competent in some ways. It's not a total failure. It's not like in the F category. It's not like the worst, but it feels like just badly written TV. It's like high production value TV, but badly written. Like a really bad episode of the A-Team. So, it feels a lot like the A-Team as far as like the way that they're trying to do it, other than it's just a copy of True Lies and it's completely unoriginal in that sense. So I don't know. I would give it a D to D minus, not really an F. Like, it doesn't completely fail. Like, it does execute its story somewhat. It just, like, the story isn't really believable for the most part. Like, why would this girl be here? Why would they both not know, even though they pointed out, like, it's kind of weird that you don't know, considering you work in the same office because you worked in the same town and they kept it secret. And so you had to have a character, like, explain all of it halfway through the episode. It just doesn't, it just doesn't work, right? And so, anyway, that's what it is. So you let me know down below in the comment section what you think about it. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one.